Good afternoon or good morning everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining. So today we are going to help you migrate from Lightroom to Capture One. So really the idea is to get you up and running as quick as possible, give you some sort of comparisons to the different terminology used and some of the different ways of working, and of course some of the same ways of working as well. If this is your first webinar, my name's David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And today, as usual, we have a maximum 60 minutes. It was about 45 minutes this morning, so let's see how we go. You're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. If you're on your Mac or PC, if you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the last section is called questions. So put a question in there, that will come straight through to me. If you're on your Android device or iOS device, there's a question mark in the top right hand corner. You can tap that and ask me a question in the same way. The session's being recorded too, so if you want to pick it up tomorrow on YouTube you can, and you'll get a follow-up email sometime tomorrow which details where that is. So let us begin. So you should be able to see Capture One on screen right now. As usual, I've forgotten to start my mouse locator, so this will just help you to see the mouse on screen. So there's a catalog open currently, but we're going to rewind quite a bit and take you from the start. So I'm going to quit out of Capture One and show you what happens on startup. So I'm working on a Mac, but the process is pretty much the same on a PC. I'll point out any PC differences as we go along. So when you download Capture One, it contains every sort of run mode, as we call it. So when you first start Capture One, you'll be presented with this screen. So select your Capture One product. So you people listening out there are only going to be interested in the first three. So the Pro version is, if you like, the full version, supports more than 500 cameras. Pro for Sony is the same, but it only supports Sony cameras. The main benefit of that is that it's a lower price point. Then there's Express for Sony, which is completely free and works with any compatible Sony camera, but with a smaller feature set. The reason why we have these two Sony products is that we have a close cooperation with Sony to offer that to their customers at a different price, and also the free version as well. But when you're evaluating your trial, if you're indeed in a trial, or if you've already bought Capture One, then we just want to say Pro. You can try up to 30 days fully featured, or buy and activate from the same screen. So let's say try. Oh, it's going to load up my last catalog, but I'm just going to close that down once it's popped open. And we're going to start by making, oh, by the way, this is the Resource Hub, a little online portal which pops up during the trial period, but more on that later. It's very useful. So don't just close that down when you see it. Actually use this to help your journey with Capture One. So more on that later. So I'm going to close down this current catalog, and we're going to make a brand new one, get some images in there via the import, of course, talk about the shortcuts and interface that are good to know. And then work with some of the tools, some basic operations like copy and apply, and then finish with exporting. So first of all, we're going to make a new catalog. So File, New Catalog. Now this is very similar to Lightroom's .lrcat. So similar principle, it's the database part which tracks the location of your images and holds adjustments and metadata and that sort of thing. So we need a name for our catalog. I'm going to call that Webinar PM. The location by default is in the Pictures folder. If you want to change that, wherever you see a little box with 3 dots in it, takes us into a sub-menu where I could change the location. But I'm just going to, leave this in the Pictures folder. and say OK. Now for best performance, it makes sense to have your catalog database locally, so on your laptop. If it's on an SSD drive, so much the better. But in theory, you can store a catalog anywhere. So if you want to read it from an external hard drive, a server or whatever, then it's entirely possible. So let's say OK. And our little catalog will open. Let's just make this bigger so you can see what's going on. And before we get to the interface and so on, let's get some images in there. And you can see a very large import button in the middle, or we can simply use the icon on the toolbar, top left, or we can say File, Import Images, like so. So this will open a separate dialog. Now, if you've placed a memory card in your reader, then that's going to pop up automatically in Capture One. But the import dialog is really where you choose where you want your images to come from and where you want them to go to. So I'm just going to choose a folder. So I've got a small little external hard drive attached called Traveler SSD. It's just a small USB SSD drive external. So let's just grab this folder here and say open. So that will quickly preview all the images in that folder like so. Now underneath there is a checkbox called Include Subfolders. So for example, if I was to choose something with a more extensive folder tree, let's just go to the top here and say open. Now there's no images in that particular folder, but there is subfolders. So if I check that box, then Capture One will start discovering all those images like so. But I'm sure you don't want to watch me import hundreds and hundreds of images, so let's go and choose this one once more. And of course there's the obvious Exclude Duplicates button underneath. So if you're reporting from the same memory card and you don't want to clear the memory card after each import, then you can just check Exclude Duplicates. So this is going to be our source. Now where are we going to import the images to? We have a couple of different choices here. Now the first one, current location, that means the images are going to stay on that hard drive. We're not going to move them, we're not going to copy them, we're not going to do anything to them. They're going to stay right there, but Capture One will add them to the catalog. So that's the same as just saying in the Lightroom menu you can say add as such. So no copying, no conversion, just added to the catalog in whatever state they are. We can say inside catalog, which is a bit of a weird one. That's kind of aimed at the Aperture or sort of ex-Aperture users amongst you. And what that means is when you import inside catalog, remember we made Webinar PM. So if I look in my Finder, in the Pictures folder, you can see there it is, Webinar PM. That is our Capture One catalog. Again, very similar to the LRCat. If you use inside catalog, it means images get copied directly inside the catalog database. So that gives you a managed file, or managed catalog, I should say, which is how kind of Aperture pushed you into doing things. It's how, you know, iPhoto works as well. I mean, it's very simple and convenient because it means it makes the catalog very sort of portable and all the images come with it. But of course, at some point, your catalog is going to outgrow the size of your hard drive. So that's the disadvantage. And the third and final option is choose a folder. So of course, if we're importing from a camera memory card, we're not going to leave them in the current location. We're going to want to choose a folder and put them somewhere. So I'm going to keep this nice and simple and just say current location. Now all the other options further down, you don't need to know that or really access any of those to do a successful import. So that just enables you to back up, to rename the images if you wish, to add some metadata, or to add a preset if you like, so adjustments to the image. So we've got 136 images staying in their current location. So let's say import all, like so. So we'll see the activity monitor pop up. So the import is complete. Now the only thing that Capture One is doing now is generating previews. Sorry about that, I was just chatting away merrily and GoToWebinar crashed on me, which it hasn't done for years, so that was very strange. So where I left off was that we imported the images, and then you saw, let's just open it, the activity window was saying creating previews. So basically what that means, as I said, that was a background task. So what's happening is that, and the same for Lightroom when it's creating its previews, whether that's one-to-one previews or minimal or smart or whatever, that's creating a preview of every single image in the catalog. So basically when I'm whizzing through images, then it happens nice and quickly because Capture One doesn't have to look at any of the raw data, we're just looking at the previews. Now, there's a very important aspect which you must pay attention to, which is if you look in Capture One's preferences, on the PC you'll find these in the edit menu. Capture One menu is unique to Mac. And if we look under image, you'll see the preview size is set to a certain number of pixels. Now by default it's 2560, which is fine for most of us. But if you're lucky enough to have a 4K screen or a 5K screen, then you need to bump up the preview size. Otherwise what happens is the preview is too small, and it means when you're flicking through images that they don't load up nice and quickly because Capture One has to recall the raw data. So if you do have a 4K machine or a 5K machine, do make sure you bump that up in the preferences in the image tab, like so. Now that will only affect new imports, so if you already have some existing images, you can say File, Regenerate Previews in this option here. So very important. Now by default, all of the previews in Capture One are smart. So basically if I don't have access to the originals, I can still browse my catalog, make adjustments and so on, and I'll show that to you in a minute. So what actually happened after our import, so this is the first time we dig into the interface a little bit. Now Capture One is not modal, so there is no library mode, there's no develop mode or anything like that. You can do anything at any point. Now by default on the left hand side we have a variety of tool tabs which contain different tools. And the first one is the library tool tab, which allows us to do all our catalog operations. Sorry, I was just checking someone was okay online. Yes, they are. So the first tool tab allows us to do all our catalog operations. And if you remember, if I go back to my Finder, and this will be the same on Windows, and we look at my little external hard drive, we can see that Traveler SSD, Capture One demo catalog, demonstration images, David Grover, that's me. We can see that the path here has 136 images like so. So this basically, the last part of the library tool shows me the absolute location of where my images are. Now if I do another sort of quick import, let's just hit import again. Let's just choose a different collection. Let's choose this small collection here, like so. And they're going to stay on their current location. Let's say import all. So that's the import complete, like so. Now we're building our previews, as you can see, and you can see this folder has popped up, import collection, and then there was that previous collection of images like so. So the folders area shows you exactly where your images are. Now if you're looking at an image, let's take our B here for example, and you don't exactly know where that is, let's say you're looking at it in album collection, we can right click on it and say show in library or show in Finder, and that will take me to it on the hard drive. Or if you say show in library, then it will simply highlight the drive where it is. So if you have images spread across a number of drives, even if they're not online, they still show up here, and you can always locate where the image should be. So you don't necessarily have to have all your drives connected to be able to browse a big catalog. So that's really handy. Now the first part, catalog collections, are just simple shortcuts. So they show you where all your images are, or shows you all images regardless of where they are stored. The last 10 imports, so just as a little quick reference, very handy if you've imported, you know, from a bunch of memory cards. Recent captures if you shot tethered to a catalog, and trash. And as who was asking, Alan was saying, is the trash system trash? That's Capture One catalog trash. So if you delete an image, you can say delete, move to catalog trash, like so. Or you can do a hard delete, delete from disk. So you do have the choice. So you've got your get out of jail card if that was a mistake, or you can delete from disk, like so. Alan, no, sorry, is it Rick? Rick says, David, I use my MacBook Pro with a 4K screen. When I'm traveling, do I need to change my previews when connected to my 4K screen? Rick, I would just leave it set to 4K. I mean, there's no downside to having larger previews. They take a bit longer to build, but you're on a decent machine. So I would just leave them set to 4K. And Ryan says, if I'm looking at images and they aren't full screen like they are on your screen, can I get away with 2560 even though I have a 5K iMac? I wouldn't, Ryan. I would bump them up to 4K, because whenever you look at an image, you know, like so, for example, I mean, that's on your 5K screen, this edge is going to be more than 2560 pixels. So it's going to slow you down. So it's better to go big, and then you'll get the best performance. Okay, so now that we've got some images into Capture One, we can think about the interface a little bit. So as you saw by default, we have Tools and Tool tabs. So these are the Tool tabs on the left-hand side, Viewer in the center, and Browser on the right-hand side. Now, if you prefer, if you like a more Lightroom-esque layout, then if we go to Window, then you'll find the ability to save workspaces and switch between different workspaces. So if you start to customize your workspace, don't forget to save it. So if we look in the View menu and you want to place the tools on the right, for example, then Tools and Browser will switch. If you want to go one step further and say place browser below, then we have the browser at the bottom, and we can turn that into a film strip, so we can just browse around more in a sort of Lightroom fashion if that's what your eyes and, you know, muscles are used to, and so on. If we say, or basically if you learn a couple of basic shortcuts, that's going to help you. So Command B or Control B on your PC, that will hide the browser. Command or Control T will hide the tools, for example. And there is also the ability to enter full screen as well. So in my case, the shortcut is F. So if I tap F, then we get a nice full screen view like so, with a pop out tools if we want them, and a pop-out browser if we want them. And in full screen view, if I do Command B, then I actually get a nice layout like so, just with the browser and that. And if I press F once more, then we jump back out of full screen. You might prefer, if you look under workspaces, there's some predefined workspaces. There's one called Migration. So if I tap that, then that kind of does a bit of a similar sort of Lightroom layout, so you might prefer that. If we go back to the default, then this is pretty much how I work. Now, another thing to help you, on the top, on the left and on the right are various action buttons which turn on things like exposure warning or grid lines, for example. If you right click and say icon and text, then that gives a name to those icons as well, which just helps you a bit when you're, first learning a new application. Now, in terms of other customization, these various tool tabs at the top, for example, if you never shoot tethered, so the camera tab is all to do with tethered capture, you can right click on it and say remove tool tab, and I'm just going to get rid of that entire tool tab. It's just wasting space. If you want to move tool tabs around, if you're on the Mac, you can just Command click or Alt click on a PC and just move them around. And equally, if you think, you know what, in the exposure tool tab, I would love to have a white balance tool, you can just right click, say add tool, and here's my white balance tool, and we can reorder them in any particular way. If I want to get rid of a tool, so let's go to the color tool tab. If I want to get rid of white balance, I can just drag it out and say remove tool by clicking on the last dots. So you can really shape the application how you need it to be. Don't forget to save your workspace. There's a whole bunch more of kind of interface options. So have a little explore through the view menu. Now you'll see in any menu that the shortcuts are highlighted kind of on the right hand side. There is one shortcut which I would urge you to customize yourself, which is this one, Hide Viewer. So what Hide Viewer does is simply, if I choose it, is hide the viewer. So I get a nice thumbnail view like this, and then if I bring the viewer back, show viewer, then it does it like so. Now the default shortcut is a bit of a kind of annoying one. I think it's Shift Command V or Shift Control V. So what I set it to is the key which sits directly under my escape key. Now depending where you are in the world, I think, so those of you in the USA right now, the key under the escape key, if you look under it, I think is the tilde, as it's known, the squiggle. On a UK or Euro keyboard, it's the period key. So if I just tap that key, then I can flick between show viewer and hide viewer very nicely. To customize your keyboard shortcuts, go to edit keyboard shortcuts. On the PC, it's in the edit menu. So edit keyboard shortcuts. Now you'll see the list on the left roughly follows the list at the top. So I know if I go into view, show hide filter, all you need to do is tap in the field, tap the key you want, and now you've reassigned that shortcut. So I know in Lightroom you press G to get the grid view up, but ergonomically my left hand sits on the left hand side of the keyboard, so I can show and hide my viewer nicely. I've got access to Control, Option, Command, and Shift, all within easy reach. Kevin says, how can I set the default location for all catalogs? Well, whenever you say File, New Catalog, it will be sticky. It will just be whatever you said the last time. So in this case, pictures, but it's always sticky. Lowell says, when you import, can you keep the location? Yes. So same thing for when you say import, the source is sticky as well. So if you're always importing from the same external hard drive, then it's also sticky here too. So most things like that are sticky. Mihai says, what's the third command, move to catalog trash? Oh, that does the same thing. So it just depends. We won't cover it today, but there's an alternative method of file management called sessions. So these three options might change if you're using a session or if you're working in a collection, not in a folder as I am. But this does the same thing, just so you know. Okay, so I would really urge you to change that shortcut. It's just much nicer. And also when you're in thumbnail view, if I then double click on an image, tap, tap, then it opens it up in the viewer straight away. Now, so remember to set that shortcut, Command B to hide and show the browser, Command T to hide and show the tools, all very useful. Now, other shortcuts that are worth remembering are in relation to the cursor tools at the top. And this is quite a big difference to how Lightroom works. So these along the top change the behavior of what the cursor does. So a very obvious one would be this one, which is to crop. So if I tap that, I then have the ability to crop the image. Now it's an old school crop, so the crop moves, not the image behind it. Just again, a small difference there. Now once you've cropped an image, you're done. So you don't have to press enter. If I press enter now, nothing happens and you just get the bong noise from the Mac. You don't have to do anything. So the crop will show whenever you have the crop cursor tool selected. If I change to a different cursor tool like the pan tool, then you see the image snaps and the uncropped area disappears. So for example, if you can learn C for crop, so you can adjust. By the way, you can rotate by hovering at the side, like so. And H for the pan tool, then that's going to help you a lot as well. Now those shortcuts can also be reassigned if you wish. But when you have the pan tool up, you can double click to zoom in to 100% and double click to zoom out. If you're a button clicking person, then you've also got big head to zoom to 100% and little head to fit screen. Obviously, there's also shortcuts for viewer zoom. So for example, I have D as 100% and fit screen as S. So if I tap D, then I go to 100%. If I tap S, then I fit screen. And you see it's all nice and snappy and quick as well, like so. If you want, you can customize this toolbar more and add some icons, take some away if you wish. But just remember, action buttons that do something, like turn on exposure warning, like so, and cursor tools that change the behavior of the cursor. So just getting a basic understanding of that is going to help you a great deal. Okay, so what about the tools? So by default, the tools live over here on the left hand side, divided into a kind of left to right workflow fashion. So library management, as we saw, lens corrections, exposure, color stuff, detail stuff like sharpening, noise reduction, styles and presets. So presets, as you would know in Lightroom, metadata, including keywords, for example, and then the final two tabs for output processing. Now all the tools work in a similar way. So if I just bring up our exposure tool into the middle, so you can make a floating tool as well if you wish. So I'm sure you can all use sliders. So if I drag the slider, then that's going to edit the image on screen. To preview what a singular slider is doing, you can just long press on the name. So if I click and hold on exposure, I can see before and after. Or indeed, if I click and hold on contrast, I can see before and after, like so. Let's just chuck in some other adjustments. To reset everything in the tool, the fourth icon across is the reset tool icon. So tap that and it resets. If we do something a bit different, if we hold our Alt key down, or Option as you might know it, and long press, then you can see before and after for that tool. You see there is no on-off button in the tool itself. It's an Option click, like so, to see before and after. To reset any slider to 0, double tap, and it takes it back to 0. So just double tap anywhere on the slider itself, and it will reset it back to 0. Very useful. First little icon here, question mark, takes you to a help page relating to that particular tool. So if you just want to do a quick read up, you can do. A for auto adjustments. Third one is copy and apply, which we'll come back to. Fourth one is reset, as you saw earlier. Fifth one allows you to save a preset for this particular tool, or indeed choose a preset from that particular tool. And finally, we can remove the tool once it's floating, and we can change the defaults. So if you prefer to always have 10 points of contrast for your camera, then you can say save as defaults for, in this case, it's a Sony a7R Mark III. And that means every time an image from a Sony a7R Mark III is introduced, it will use this default. So you can have camera specific defaults if you're using a bunch of different bodies as well. Sean says, is there a global before and after? Yes, there is. So if we were to just adjust this image a little bit, for example, so let's just throw in a few tools just for fun, like so, and a crop, because the crop, let's just change the crop a little bit. H on my keyboard to come out of crop. So if you want to see a global before and after, again, you've got a master reset up the top here. So if I reset and that was an accident, I can just say undo and we're straight back. If I option click the reset button, then we get temporary before and after, like so. So that would just reset everything and so on. The steps for undo and redo, I think it's infinite actually. I can't remember Mihai, but I've never run out. It's a bit different to Lightroom in that it's not a history per image. It's an undo for, how's the best way to say it? It's an undo for your kind of path through Capture One. So if I say undo crop, that's just going to undo the crop. I can say redo crop. If I switch images, I can say undo like so. So it's an undo for your path through Capture One. So if I now go to this image and change something, so lift up the highlights or whatever, and I say, and I go back to this one, it's still edit undo selection. So I hope that's clear as well. So all the tools work in a very similar way, as you can see. So they all have this, generally have this variety of buttons up the top. So let's pop this guy back over here like so and talk about copy and apply. So just a very simple basic thing which you're all going to need to do. So I'm going to open up another catalog. So just open up my demo catalog like so. Notice that I've now got two catalogs open at the same time. So Capture One is more than happy to do that. It doesn't have to relaunch or close down the other catalog. You can always work in a couple of catalogs at the same time if you wish. So copy and apply, let's just grab a sequence of images. So let's grab just this happy chap here. So if these are on default, you can see reset is grayed out. So there's nothing to reset, so that's how it comes out of camera. But let's just do a few little tweaks. So let's just brighten it a bit, have some contrast, open the shadows, have a little bit of a vignette. Someone asked a question about vignetting earlier, so I will come back to that at the end. I haven't forgotten you. So I've done a bunch of adjustments here. So how do I get them to flow across all the other shots? So very simple, grab copy, like so, shift select the other images that I want to have. Let's have one more to fill in that space, and then simply press apply. Job done, easy peasy, like so. I'm going to say undo, so it undoes those. Let's do something different. Let's say I want to also have a crop. So press C for crop on my keyboard. And let's throw a crop onto our gentleman here, something like that. Now I say copy once more. And as soon as I say copy, if we look in the adjustments tool tab, then you can see any box that's ticked means it's copied an adjustment into the clipboard. Now let's say I don't want to copy the crop across, I can just uncheck that. And now if I shift select, say a bunch more, and I say apply, it'll do everything except for the crop. So global copy and apply you'll find up here. It's also in the adjustments menu, and also of course with a shortcut which you can customize too. But what if we just want to copy and apply one adjustment across to the images? Let's say we want to get exactly the same crop to all these different images. So if I find the crop tool, which is in the lens tool tab, is it called lens? I can't remember. Anyway, the second tool tab looks like a lens. Then if you remember, I briefly mentioned there's also a copy and apply in each tool. So if I want to get the the crop from the primary variant, the primary is the one with the thick white border. So that's what we refer to as the primary. So you can see it has a fatter white border. This is the one I'm going to copy from. And if I click on the copy apply button, oops, sorry, wrong tool. Click on the copy and apply button. You see crop is ticked, and I can say apply, and it copies across. Simple as that. Now if I adjust this image and I want to now get this crop across to everything else, I can be even faster. If I hold my shift key down, then it will just disregard or bypass that dialog. Assume I want to copy the crop. So if I shift click this up and down tool, then it does that single tool like so. Super speedy. Works with anything. So let's say I just want to tweak the exposure a bit. I thought I overcooked it. Shift click the little up and down arrow, shift click, then the exposure goes across. I'll do it more dramatically so you can see that it works pretty seamlessly and quickly as well. So that's your global sort of copy and apply. Question from Michael. How are synonyms handled on import from Lightroom? Keyword, the common name for an animal, and the synonym is the scientific name for the animal. Good question, Michael. I'm not sure. What you can do, we don't have too much time to dig into keywords, but what I'd suggest is that you export your keyword library from Lightroom, and then in the keyword library tool, you can say create keyword library, click on the three dots, create keyword library, and say from keyword text file and import that. But I'm pretty sure the synonyms will be ignored. You can have hierarchical keywords, of course, parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, and so on, but as yet not synonyms. But you could keep them in the text file at least, so if synonym support comes, then they will be automatically added into the keyword library. Okie dokie. So, as for the rest of the tools, I'm sure you pretty much know how to use a variety of those. There's loads of tutorials on, color editing, color balance, adjustments, and so on. So there's lots of ways you can read up on that, and I'll show you some good ways to find that, namely the resource hub. But let's say you've gone through, you've you've adjusted all your images as you see fit, and now you want to export and adjust them. Export them out to their final formats, TIFF, JPEG, so on and so forth. There's two ways you can do that in Capture One. So there's, if you like, the quick and dirty way, or there's the kind of more sophisticated way to keep consistency and so on as you continue working through Capture One. So quick and dirty way is to say File, Export Images and Variants, like so. And then basically start at the top and work your way down. So where do you want your images to go? So we could choose a folder. Let's just choose the pictures folder. You can set up a subfolder as well if you wish. This can also be a variable, like for example, today's date. So if we click on this box, we can choose from a bunch of different variables which are called tokens. So for example, we could use today's date or the date that the image was shot and so on. Naming if you want to rename, and then the recipe is where you create how you want to export the image. So let's say I could have a JPEG at full size. So if I just grab these images, 4 shots, say File, Export Images, Variants. Going into Pictures, if you want to just verify where that is, tap the arrow and it will take you right there. And let's just do a full-size JPEG, say notify when completed, export for variants, processing. See the activity bar pop up, export is completed. So if I go to the pictures folder, it's made a folder called My Export, and there are my full-size JPEGs, like so. Easy. So that's the quick and dirty way to do it, but it is not the most efficient way, because let's say I now want to export these as TIFFs. I've got to go back into the dialog, change this over to TIFF, readjust everything, and so on. So that's kind of an inefficient way to do it. The smart way to do it is to look at the second to last tool tab, which is Process Recipes. So these allow you to design recipes which you can call on at any time to export the file in the same way. And of course you can run multiple process recipes at the same time, being even more efficient. So there's some canned, if you like, default recipes here. If you want to make a new one, let's do that. We click plus. Let's say we want to make a JPEG, which is 2000 pixels wide, like so. So in the next tool, I would define what this recipe does. So we said JPEG, let's have sRGB. Let's say the scale or the width is going to be in pixels, and I want it to be 2000, like so. Now, handy little tip, setting the JPEG compression has always been a bit sort of ambiguous. How much can I get away with? And of course, what we all end up doing is sticking it at 90%, kind of hoping that's, you know, enough and so on. But what we can actually do with the process recipe is proof exactly how the image is going to look in terms of size, color profile, sharpening, and other factors by proofing it. So first step is to go to 100%. So we can see our image here, nice and sharp and in focus. Turn on recipe proofing, and that will proof the image to the currently selected recipe. So if I say proof, then now the image has snapped to 2000 pixels across, and I can slide my quality slider down until I get a good compromise between, if we look at the summary, file size, guesstimate, as you can see, and to a level of quality. Now I also know that when we make an image smaller or larger, that we have some loss of sharpness. So in the adjustments tab of the recipe, I can say add some output sharpening. So I'm going to just sharpen this up a little more so that it's nice and crisp when it goes on my website, for example. Well, not my website, Zach's website, Zach Sutton, one of our ambassadors who took this nice headshot. So now we can proof exactly how it looks. If I turn off recipe proofing, I can fit screen again, which means we now have a perfect recipe specifically for a JPEG that is 2000 pixels wide. Output location, we've got set to pictures. Now let's pick this up. So choose folder, pictures, like so. And again, subfolder we can automate here. So I can click on the square here and let's choose the current date, for example, May 24th, 2018. So that will automate creating a folder based on the current date. So now let's select 4 images. Say process. Let's click on the arrow to go there, and you can see May 24th, and it's popping out our images quite nicely as well. Now there's a whole bunch of really high level clever stuff you can do with process recipes in terms of renaming, in terms of placing images in different locations and so on. Now there's not time to go into that today, but I can urge you to watch some of the previous webinars if file management is one of your particular headaches, or having to process large volumes of images as well. Using process recipes means you're consistent, you know exactly how your image is going to look. You can run multiple recipes at the same time, delivering to different locations, different folders, and so on. It's a really handy little workflow enhancer. Now, one last thing to finish on these sort of batch operations that we've done is that there's a little toggle up on the toolbar, which is well worth knowing what it does. So you've seen, for example, when I do a process, then it processed all 4 of those images. When I did a copy and apply, so let's mess with the first one again and say copy apply, that it happens to all of those images as you would expect. And you'll see when I say copy and then apply, as I hover over the apply arrow, you probably can't read it on a webinar transmission, but a number pops up here which shows me how many images that's going to affect, which is telling me it's going to affect 4 images, like so. Now, if for some reason you are doing these things, copy and apply, but nothing is happening, it probably means you've turned this off. And this is a toggle which basically means do the adjustment or the sort of batch copy apply to all images or just the selected. So if I turn this toggle off and I adjust it and I say copy apply, nothing happens. And then it's going to drive you crazy. You're going to bang your head against the screen and wonder what on earth is going on. Same thing goes if I start a process recipe, you'll get a warning saying you have selected multiple variants, but edit all selected variants. This guy is off. Do you want to process only the primary or all the selected? So generally this should be on. You might be thinking, why on earth would you ever want to turn this off? Great question out there. Well, it can be very handy, certainly if we're looking at a bunch of images like this. Imagine you've just captured this fine headshot and you're going through, I'm just using my cursor keys saying, okay, sir, which image do you prefer out of all of these? We're going to star rate it, for example. So I think that top left is the best. So I'm going to tap 5 on my keyboard to give that 5 stars. But now, unfortunately, that's happened to every single image. So I'm going to press 0 to clear that. Now if I turn off edit all selected and now press 5 on my keyboard, you see it only happens to this one. And I can advance to the next set of 4, for example, and do the same thing and say, okay, let's have this one as our 5-star image and so on. So there is a good case for being able to turn that on and off. It's just not something you'll find in Lightroom in a similar way. So it does drive some people crazy, understandably, if you accidentally just toggle that off. You'll find it in the edit menu, edit all selected variants. So just be aware, generally you want this guy lit up and everything will work quite nicely. Okay, so that gives you a sort of quick flow through Capture One. Oh, I guess what I could add, for those of you who are Photoshop users, of which there are many, of course, if you want to send an image automatically to Photoshop and back again, like a round trip, right click on the image or selection of images. Let's do 3 for fun. Right click and say edit with. And when you use edit with, we're always going to create an extra file, like a Photoshop file or a TIFF or whatever. So if I say edit with, let's have a PSD. We're going to open with Photoshop. Let's say edit 3 variants. Capture One will start processing. Now you'll see a PSD has popped up there. PSD has popped up there, and finally a PSD has popped up there. So that's put that PSD alongside the raw file wherever it is. Now if I was to go to this image and do some amazing retouching, so I'll do something really obvious so that you can see. So with my brush, let's just do a big squiggle here. Close this image down and say save. When I go back to Capture One, it'll regenerate the, which one did I scribble on? Where was it? This one here. It'll regenerate the preview to include that edit. Now, if I right click and say open with Photoshop, that's just going to open the file. It's not going to create another one. We're going to open that up. And here it goes. Then if I make another edit, for example, save that. Close that again, go back to Capture One, preview will regenerate like so, and then we can round trip. Now, can you round trip anywhere else? Yes, you can round trip to pretty much anything. So when you right click and say edit with, pick your application here. The only thing you might have to do, now this sounds bizarre, but the way different applications save and close a file is different. Pity that all the manufacturers don't do it the same. So Adobe do it one way, Affinity do it another way. So if you find when you say make a change to a file, if it's not reflected in Capture One, just say File, Regenerate Previews, like that. And then it will read the data again and generate the preview. But layered Photoshop file is fully supported, as you can see. If I just say open with again, you'll see I just added a layer into this one. So it all works really nice and seamlessly with Capture One. Okie dokie. Something that you might want to think about later. I wouldn't suggest this is the very first thing you do, because it's not often the fastest sort of operation, depending how big your Lightroom catalog is. But I'm going to make another new catalog. Let's call this Lightroom import. So I've got an empty catalog like so. And instead of saying import, I'm going to say file, import catalog, Lightroom catalog. You'll get a dialog here that tells you what we can import. So collections, crop, rotation, and so on and so forth. There's a full list here. Say continue. What you need to do is target your lightroom.lrcat. And Capture One will read that and bring that into Capture One. Now we don't move any images, so it won't mess up your current Lightroom catalog. All it does is read anything, nothing gets moved. In user collections, we make a little group over here, which also shows any collections you might have, like so. So as they're popping in, and you can see in Lightroom, I just added some star ratings. So you see that's come across as the previews get built. There's a crop that's come in as well, and adjustments being approximated too. Now they're not going to look, I think this one, so I fiddled with exposure and contrast in Lightroom and so on. So they're not going to look identical. No two raw converters are the same. I will argue Capture One's going to look better, of course, but at least with things like cropping, orientation, rotation, white balance, metadata, all that stuff's going to come across. So that's going to save you. Now, as I said, I wouldn't suggest you make that the first thing you do. This was only 150 odd images. Of course, you're going to have more. So it could be something you just leave to chug away overnight, because Capture One does have to make new previews, of course. Okay, I'm just going to open up this one again to answer Carl's question. Do Photoshop layers show up in Capture One? No. I mean, we're looking at the PSD file, but we can't dig into the PSD layers, but they do stay intact. So if, let's say, you've done some fantastic retouching to this image, of course, then it does stay intact. So if I right click and say open with Photoshop, let's just delete that layer because it's so oh no, duplicate it even. Let's just delete that layer as it's so fantastic. Save that again. If we go back to Capture One, there we go, it's updated. But what is really nice, let's make a new layer. Let's say we actually going to call this a proper retouch layer and zoom in a bit. I'm not a retoucher, so do not take any of this as teaching, but let's say we're just going to retouch a few bits. Like so. He's got pretty damn good skin, so that's easy. So we've just done a bit of basic retouching. Now if I close this down, let's say save, then our PSD like so is gonna update, so that's got all our retouching and so on. But don't forget in Capture One, let's say, oh, we want a black and white version of this. There's no reason why you can't say make a new variant. So this is a PSD variant, and we can still edit the Photoshop file in Capture One. Obviously you want to try and work on the raw data as much as possible, but if it's the matter of just doing a quick you know, black and white edit or something, then there's no reason why you can't do that in Capture One as well. And if I think, oh, I missed some of my retouching, if I right click and say open with once more Photoshop, here it comes. Let's find something else to retouch. Let's do something really obvious like retouch his button out. Amazing job. So let's save that and close that down. Oh, there we go. So that's saving. If I go back to Capture One, you see his button has gone on this one, and it's also gone on the black and white. So it's really simple to work between Capture One and Photoshop in that round trip aspect. Mihai says, can you import a Lightroom catalog into a Capture One session? No, you can't. So you could import it to a catalog first, and then you could export all the images into a session, but to be honest, I don't think that would be the simplest way to do it, but technically it could be possible. Are non-Sony lenses supported in the Sony Pro version? Yes, I believe they are, Louis. So for lens corrections, yes. But just run up the trial and have a check. Just look in the lens tab. I don't think there's only... If you just check the lens tab, I'm pretty sure the full complement of lenses are there, for example. So I don't think you have to worry about that. But run up the trial and have a look. Now for learning, you've basically seen just a quick whiz through 10% of Capture One, but it should help you get up and running, just getting images into Capture One, doing some sort of basic organization and so on, and getting through adjusting and copy and apply and so on. But if you want to know more, which I hope you do, then go to Help and then Resource Hub. And this opens up our little online portal into the world of Capture One education. So if you look in the bottom left, new to Capture One, there's 4 easy tutorials. So if I say watch tutorials, that takes me to a YouTube playlist, which has getting started. So making catalogs, adjustments and export. So pretty much what we did today. If we go back to the Resource Hub and look at tutorials, for example, then the latest ones show up here. So you can scroll up and down, for example, and the getting started ones are here as well. If you want to see more, just tap more tutorials and that will take you to the whole Capture One playlist. If you want to dive a bit deeper, then have a look at webinars. And for example, if you want to know more about color, shooting tethered, working with sessions and so on, then once again, if we click the More Webinars tab, like so, then you'll find all the various back catalogue of webinars as well. If you want to know a bit more about the editing possibilities, I'd thoroughly recommend watching last week's. That was me and my colleague Alex who did that. And the last image edit we did really, opens up the possibilities of what's possible in Capture One without going into Photoshop, for example. If you're a styles user, this is a good one to look at. And if color is your thing, then definitely the masterclass for the color editor is well worth having a look at too. Last question from Andreas. Can you import Lightroom presets into Capture One? Could you generate Lightroom presets as an Icc profile? I don't know about the second part, generating as an Icc profile. Somebody out there might be making something that allows you to do that. You can't import Lightroom presets, but what you could do, and I've never tried this myself, so this is all theoretical, but of course what you could do in Lightroom is take 10 images and apply a preset to each one, and then export that collection as a catalog, and then import that catalog, file, import, catalog, into Capture One. Now it's going to be really approximate, but it might give you a starting point. And as I said, that's all theoretical. I've never tried it myself, but give it a try. It could be worth doing. But if you do manage to generate an Icc profile in the color tool tab in base characteristics, so let's just pick, you'll see here the Icc profile Canon ES5D Mark III. If you've built your own Icc profile, then it will just show up under Other, for example, if you've put it in the right folder for the OS, so for Mac and Windows. Capture One will just go ahead and find it. Next webinar, following on from here, so we haven't talked about it today, but sessions are a unique method of file management. So catalog is very similar to a Lightroom library, as you've seen. Good idea to get a broad overview of all your life's work with ways to organize and so on. Sessions are very much designed for a single job. So if you go and shoot tethered in the studio, session makes sense. If you go out on location and shoot a fashion campaign for the day, a session makes more sense. So next webinar, June 7th, we show you the difference between the two. what makes a smart choice to use one when, and how to actually use both of them in combination to get the best kind of workflow. When you get your follow-up email tomorrow, there's also a sign-up link in there for that webinar too. When you exit the webinar, you'll get a link to answer a survey. If you would, I'd be very grateful. It only takes about 30 seconds, and that just makes us aware of what you need and if we're doing everything correct. Thanks again for your attention today. Hope that helps your journey with Capture One. Don't forget to use the Resource Hub, always available from the help menu for great education. Thanks for your time and take care.